card is Ed Wood from 1994, directed by Tim Burton, of course, starring Johnny Depp, Martin Landau, SJP. Quick logline: ambitious but troubled movie director Edward D. Wolf Jr. tries his best to fulfill his dreams despite his lack of talent. So you're the one who actually introduced this movie to me, and I think we did an episode a while back where we covered this movie.
I think it was our LA episode, I believe.
Perhaps, yeah.
Or
But
Making
it's
Movies, one of those
or
two. I
making
can't remember.
movies, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But it stayed with me because this is probably the only movie I can think of where you're not seeing all the craft departments on steroids and all the visual flourishes of Tim Burton. Like it's one of his few movies that are set in a fairly quote unquote normal world, and it's sort of his most like mainstream, I'm going to make a movie about the movies kind of
Hmm.
movie, which you do once, as a director you've gotten some notoriety and you want to sort of be taken seriously. That's kind of how I always read that.
Right.
But it still has its quirkiness. It still has the same themes of, multiple outsiders at play. But ultimately, I think this movie is about friendship and mentorship, which is, I guess it has been explored in other of Tim Burton's movies, but not to this extent.
Hmm.
That's sort of the main text and subtext of the movie between Martin Landau's and Johnny Depp's characters. And I think that's actually really sweet to see, because I think creating art with artists often can be an isolated kind of thing, and you see that, right? All of his movies has his hands all over them.
Hmm.
But this movie, though it has all of his hands over the movie, but it's an homage to friendships. It's almost like talking about this movie after Dumbo is interesting because Martin Landau, the older character, is probably at that phase of his life where he's done with, you
Right.
know and now you have this sort of hopeful new person who's come in and who's also an outsider in Johnny Depp's character and has a different take on life. And maybe, again, maybe I'm reading too much into it, like you probably were, but it's almost like Tim Burton showing two sides of his own life, that maybe he was hopeful and optimistic and wanted to make anything from nothing, versus the old him is probably not that. And it's fun to see those two come together, collide, and obviously, and all in the backdrop of movie making. I love movies about movies, a black and white movie, kind of in the golden age time of movies. Like, that backdrop is amazing. I could watch those movies, over and over again. So yeah, that's why it's a wild card, because it just feels different but yet familiar enough, and I think it's done really well. I think it's probably Johnny Depp's best human performance, by far. So yeah, that's my wild card.
Yeah, this movie is fantastic. We talked about it before, but in terms of wild cultures, I definitely do think this is his first adult movie. Like,
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
like, not to say that his other movies weren't like mature in some way, but it's tackling much more mature themes in a quote unquote normal, more non-stylized world. I definitely agree. This was a huge kind of swing for him, and a movie that at the time I didn't see when it came out. It just wasn't, it didn't do very well, I think, initially. It wasn't wide
Mm,
release. It wasn't marketed towards, the more kid audience that the rest of the Burton films are marketed towards. So I
mm.
didn't see this till later. I think it wasn't until I was in college, actually. I actually saw this film and immediately fell in love with it when I first saw it for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. I think it's interesting that you say that it is this friendship thing, because in contrast to like Edward Scissorhands, where the artist doesn't fit in and has to go off on his own,
Right.
here all these artists coming
Are
together,
helping each other.
helping each other, right? It's artists kind of banding together, so you don't have to, it's not a solitary thing, because making movies surely isn't.
Hmm.
You have to collaborate, that you can't make a movie if you don't. And I like that he's sort of that new spin on the outsider, not only as collaborators and friends, but I also like the sense of outsider as a or outcast as a rebel in this movie. Like, he's trying to do something different. He's always trying to break down barriers and do something new and fight for his vision too. I mean, I love that scene when he's with Orson Welles, and Orson
Hmm.
Welles is sort of, also down in his career at that time. He'd kind of washed up in a way in Hollywood at this point in Orson Welles' career. And he's talking to Ed and saying, your visions, your artistic vision is something that's worth fighting for. And that is sort of the rallying cry that Ed has. And I think, again, defines Burton as an artist, I think, too, of like, I'm going to fight for my vision. I have a very specific vision. And this is what I want to get across in the screens. And there's sort of a rebellious factor in that. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
I like about this movie, too. There's that rebel sense of this, which is fun to like go off and make a movie on her own. And, it's an independent movie. And, that montage they have around when they're making Plan 9 from outer space towards the end is so cool.
Mm.
Because that's famously like the worst movie ever made,
Right.
quote unquote. It's just and the movie shooting this is like a triumph of like, oh my God,
Right.
look, we get to see them, make Plan 9 as if they're making Citizen Kane or something. I always find that to be really funny. Also, like triumphant. I mean, he lets
Right.
the outcasts win, even though in real life they didn't really, and the movie wasn't successful. And actually, the montage at the end sort of I think also underscores the fact that Ed Wood was a real artist because he died not famous and then he became famous afterwards. And now, there's a Tim Burton movie biopic about him. People are screening Plan 9 all the time. I
Mm.
think I mentioned this in another episode. When I was at USC Film School, there's an Ed Wood Film Festival that the freshmen put
Right.
on every year where they have to make a movie in 24 hours with anything they can find around the campus. So Ed Wood lives on, and I think that's what makes him an artist that he wasn't successful when he was alive.
Amazing, right? And I guess the triumph is in doing it
Mm-hmm.
and just getting to that point. And this movie celebrates that. You know it's not going to be good because he's like, no, no take. One take is
Oh,
fine. He
yeah,
never,
right.
he's like just for him, it's just like getting it done is the thing that matters. But it's so fun to see the scrappiness of how all this is coming together.
Mm-hmm.
And there's almost like like you said, a rebellious quality, but also like an unprecious quality. Like he's not sweating over minute details or any of that stuff. It's just like it's almost like he loves hanging out with these people. Like that's what the agenda is.
Mm-hmm.
What the product ends up being, who cares? It's like
Right.
we're doing it. That's what's important. And I
Yeah.
love
Me too. Yeah, I love that a lot. I think this movie is really uplifting, even though there are a lot of, the Martin Landau storyline is really
that.
sad
Right.
and tragic, but the way that it deals with those themes in this movie too, I think is very interesting. Like it doesn't bog the movie down by that
No.
sadness. It almost is just sort of fits well with the overly optimistic Johnny Depp performance too,
Yeah.
where it just feels more rounded. The world
Yeah.
feels more rounded because it has these incredible optimistic highs, but these really sad, tragic
Yeah.
life that Lugosi's leading.
You could argue that they're the same person, because we have that both things in us,
Mm,
to varying degrees. That the artist and the perfection and the lines have to be right. This is not worth my thing, but I'm also at the over the hill, and nobody wants me, and there's self-doubt and all of that. But then on the flip side, there's optimism and just a desire to get it done. My only thing rewatching it this time was that I don't know what the point of the cross-dressing stuff was. Like you almost don't need it. It feels to me sort of extra. Like eh, you can just portray the outsiderness of Johnny Depp's character just by his being, because he does feel not from the world. I don't think you needed to add this extra detail. So that was sort of interesting. I don't know if that struck you.
well, I mean, that's real. I mean, he
Oh,
actually was a
really?
crossdresser. Yeah, yeah. And
Okay.
I feel like that probably was, I mean, first of all, he was, but I think it helped add to, just in terms of the narrative, add to him as another outcast and someone who's
Right.
different because he
Another
likes
element.
dressing
Yeah.
in women's clothes. It's just another element of that. But yeah, Ed Wood also was a
All right.
crossdresser.
That's good to know. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes more sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but Johnny Depp just again, incredible performance.
So
I
good.
think he like his goofiness almost like Burton it works in the tone of the film. And another way this performance could have been too over the top and kind of hammy, but with what the rest of the tone of this movie, which is a little bit exaggerated anyway, because it's a heightened sense of reality, even though it's grounded at the same time. It's this odd tone that Burton's able to pull off, but I think Depp works really well in that context.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of his best performances for sure
Yeah.
too.
It's
Just
not his best. I mean, this and Edward Scissorhands. So I think this one even more so because he gets to speak.
right, right. He talks, yeah. Yeah, I love it. The cadence of his voice too is so funny how he talks
Yeah,
in this
and
is so
just
great.
very earnest. It kind of, like you said, it has like a screwball comedy kind of heightened
Hmm.
feeling to it. So yeah, it's pretty great. Pretty
So
great.
great. Yeah. So in terms of what Hi there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I review a new release and then discuss 6 other movies made by that film's actor or director and how they shaped us. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.